man labai malonu pristatyti Karen Forbes, kuri yra, jau minėjau, profesorė Edinburgo universiteto. Dirba tokiam inovatyviam lauke, galima sakyti, su inovacijom taip pat, bandydama sujungti tos du laukus, kurie yra irgi mums labai aktualūs, tai yra būtent menas ir architektūra, ne veltui jos ir tema skamba tarp meno ir architektūros. Ji yra dirbusi prie Amsterdamo, Čikagos, Kioto ir kitų miesto projektų, apie tai papasakos, nenoriu užbėgti už akių. Taip pat Karen yra organizacijos kūrybinių industrijų asociacijos Creative Scotland tarybos narė. Yra išleidusi knygą, kuri vadinasi Site Specific, tai yra pokalbiai su Peter Cintoru, Stevenu Holu, Gary Hagar ir daugelį kitų žinomų pasaulio architektų, tai tą jį truputėlį pristatys pati. Na ir turbūt neužimdama labai daug eterio laiko, pakviesiu Karen jau pratesti. So dear Karen, it's very nice to have you there. And actually, we are happy to have you, to host you in our small workshop with a big ambition to change the way we act over the creation of the city or creating the city. So the floor is yours and hope you inspire us.
Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for this kind invitation to present this work tonight. I'll be showing you several international projects of different scales, six projects in total with a few minor diversions, starting from a very small scale, but very intimate connection to the city I come from, which is Edinburgh, capital of Scotland, and moving out into different international projects. Can we have the lights down a little bit? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so the Scottish Parliament was established back in Edinburgh in 1999, and the first few years after that began to collaborate with an artist, Gordon Brennan, and we wanted to explore how we saw the city that we habitually lived in. So if we think carefully about our environment, we can set aside our habits and preoccupations to see the city again in a new way. This project was called Locus of the City. It was a research both in museums and archives, but examined a very particular site in the city. So here's a general map of Edinburgh. So we were trying to look in this very dark red bit, which includes the sort of very old medieval traces, but with many contemporary additions built on top of that. And this is a sort of architecture here. So we've got 14th century, 15th century, 16th century, 18th century, all on top of each other. So it's a very particular environment. And we were looking at the line from the Edinburgh Castle, which is volcanic rock it sits on, down to the new Scottish Parliament. So this was a little bit our ambition for this project. And while it started as a collaboration between two artists, it also included younger artists who we commissioned to be part of the project. And then we had about 50 students involved in a later exploration of all the research material we'd gathered. So this idea of a way of intersecting different bodies of knowledge is something that I'm very interested in. I think I have a natural passion for interdisciplinarity. And we'll come back to this point in the project that we're currently running. So we did all sorts of experiments in the city, mapping it, looking at historic buildings and locations. We were also looking at the structure of the guilds and the history of book printing in Edinburgh, and also map making, which we considered really important to the development of the Enlightenment in Scotland, which was a time when all different fields of knowledge, such as geology and philosophy and religion, all moved together. We were looking at, for example, the first lending library in the world, we think, though we wouldn't like to lay claim exclusively to that in Scotland, which was on the Royal Mile. And it was the first time people who couldn't afford books could take them out and borrow them. We also went down into the museum archives, the city libraries, and we looked at all the official records, But we also looked at people's testimony. So this photograph is one of a series, and this one obviously titled The Official Records. But we had a whole set which had different people's stories in them. We discovered things from the city librarian that even surprised us about our own city. So, for example, that the council had ordered the destruction of some of the poor records for the records of the extreme poverty in the city. They'd had those records destroyed. So that was a little bit of a surprise to us. Because this area, the grass market, this is showing one of the entrances into it. This is like a negative void in the middle of the city, right next to the castle rock. So you've got the status of a castle on one side. You've got this almost like bowl-like shape, like a valley, where everybody would gather. So it was a positive meeting point where festive activities took place, but it was also a place of public riots and public executions. And in the book, we tried to use a lot of the diagrammatic drawings we produced, exploring different aspects of the space, and looking at many of the structures of power. For example, the main law courts, the main museums, are all circling this site. So it's a very influential site, even though it has, it's almost like encircled by these different institutions of power. And we interviewed various specialists for this. And we went to the very earliest map records of the city. So it was a way of really trying to explore the city that we had grown up with and thought we knew. We used this research as a lens through which we could re-see our own city. We also tried to set out the book in a very interesting visual format. I think we'll have a copy in the university library. And we interviewed a number of specialists. So, for example, from art history, geology, religion, city planning, museum curatorship, and you can probably see these little symbols which reoccur through the book, denoting the different disciplines that we were interviewing. And instead of having a normal text-based index, we tried to make everything work in typographical and visual terms. So this is the index of the book. But as you can see, it's a retranscription of the later pages. So the entire layout of the book was conceived from visual and typographic perspectives. And we commissioned 2 younger artists to look through all the research material we gathered, and we discussed and negotiated with them the venues these performances would take place. This is the Magdalen Chapel, which was I don't know what the equivalent here would be, but it's like the Guild of Hammermen. So that's all the metalsmiths in the city. This was their headquarters. But it was also a Roman Catholic church and held, for example, the Covenanters, which is a religious movement in Scotland, held their bodies to public celebration of their lives in a way, or public recognition of their lives. So the minister of this church, which is still active, actually agreed to us to hold this performance, which was very unusual for him to consent to this, and we had a series of projections and songs specially written to perform in this. And this is the, you can't see him very well here, but this is one of the artists that we commissioned singing in the front. And on the diagonal to that, across the city, so if you imagine you've got this valley section, you had on one side this chapel, and then we had the newest contemporary space, which was a dance studio, and we commissioned this other performance here. So the Grass Market is a site of Enlightenment thinking, but it's also a site where the city goes out to drink and has a sort of dark underbelly as well. So we tried to mix these two together in our reading of it. And this is the project I'm currently working on. It's actually very strongly connected to locus of the city, called Edinburgh Cityscope. This is working with about 8 professors across the university. And what we're trying to do now that we have digital facilities is weave the different stories and different disciplines, both of the professors and researchers, but also the students who are making projects in different disciplines on the city will be able to feed all that information into one matrix that people will be able to go into in different formats. So this is quite a radical new idea. It's been endorsed by the principal of the University of Edinburgh. So this is something that we are working on developing currently. So I think you'll see as we go through this talk that there are a lot of lines of connection that come together over and over. So this is the background to this book, site-specific. As an ongoing part of the research I was doing, I was thinking it would be intriguing to track very specific conversations with key protagonists, key architects in the European and American scene. And I made the selection of all these different architects, commissioned a special set of interviews with them, and was often speaking directly to them in their studio, which also gave a different sense of the way they work and think. These architects are a number of different nationalities. I recorded all the dialogues in English, but it was very important for me to preserve the spirit of the conversation, the actual rhythm of speech of each architect, instead of turning it into BBC English, so that you could get a sense you were actually present with the architect when you were reading the dialogues that we'd recorded. So this is Joshua Prince Ramis, who used to be part of OMA in Rotterdam. He had his own studio in New York. And we included 4 really good representations of each of the practices' work in negotiation with each studio. And each architect gave a different inflection on what site and context meant to them. But they were very frank and clear. I mean, I think they're really quite interesting testimonies that we've gathered in this book. So this is a project by Dutch architect Bjorn Massenbroek. It's called Villa Vals. It's just beyond the perimeter of Zoomfloor's baths at Vals. And because of that very sensitive site, it's almost specially designed to hide in the hillside. This is Snoetta, also included in the book. I interviewed both of the principals for this. So this was just completing at that point, so it was a very interesting debate about the way they've made new public space out of the opera building in Oslo. And this is Bjart Ingelsdottir, who's now in many, many projects, but at that time he wasn't actually that well known. And he's, I think, talking about his optimism for what contemporary architecture can achieve. And that's certainly very much the way he's running the practice, particularly in the early days, who would get this hybrid team of master planners, engineers, architects together. So as part of this, I was running some experiments with different types of architectural visualization for other projects I was working on. And I thought it would be really intriguing if people could get to grips with some of the digital models of these buildings. So in negotiation with the different architectural studios and in negotiation with Blueprint, for their 30th anniversary, they commissioned us to make these augmented matrices that when you downloaded the app, you could interact with and actually generate the 3D models of various buildings that we featured. And we've got one of the apps here tonight, so you can try it after the talk. So it was this connection between generating 3D, 4D models with print was really an interesting thing to celebrate their anniversary with. This is Harry Guber's plan for Art Museum at Lausanne. And this is the project, again, that I showed you, Villa Vals. So it was just a new way of interpreting the digital structure of architecture. And as part and parcel of that, I decided to set up a sort of research group. But the University of Edinburgh wasn't too keen to pay for this research group. So we decided to set it up anyway, and the university has been a very keen contributor to that in terms of commissioning various projects from us to help support the development of this group. But it includes a whole variety of different projects that we run. So it's an interesting site if you want to have a look at it. We were doing a lot of very early experiments with augmented reality, and here's some of the first matrices we built for the V&A in London, when we were exploring different ways of generating connectivity between iPads and objects in the V&A collection. But actually, these matrices are strangely attractive in themselves as well. I think that there's something I'm definitely going to go back to about them. And we did much more straightforward ones as we developed the technology. This is the interpretation of Kengo Kuma's building for Dundee, which is City of Design in Scotland. And this is the interior shot. And this person is reading the hoardings that are surrounding the building site currently. So it's a way of the citizens being able to interrogate and see different views of the building before it's constructed, actually. And we made quite a lot of animations for the V&A to try and explain their projects to both the people of Dundee and the people of Scotland. And then we also were included in the augmented reality interpretations and the virtual reality presentation at the Triennale in Milan for V&A Dundee. So it's always been about this enhancing the communication of architecture and enabling people to have a much more direct experience of what is proposed. This is a piece we did for the Rockefeller Centre. It's for Grimshaw Architects, and they wanted to communicate a message about sustainability and Earth's resources. So this was done as an early example of augmented reality. Okay, so we're going to move on to a project that is one of the apps we've got here. It's for the Anatomy Museum in the University of Edinburgh. We have these fantastic historic spaces. They're all about to be destroyed and dismantled. So this is part of the historic record of this 18th century collection. So we shot a number of 360 panoramas in the different key areas, and obviously you've got this wide distortion now, but when you're looking at them on the iPad, you can navigate through them as a smooth three-dimensional space. We've highlighted different parts of the collection that were of special medical and anatomical value. This is the skull room, the collection of skulls which would be impossible to collate nowadays, but is also part of the historic collection. And we even had to recreate the artist studio, which we had a lot of fun with, because traditionally the artists sat in a garret at the top of the building drawing bits of bodies that were sent up to them by the anatomist. And also an interesting connection back to the Grassmarket project I just showed you is that was where a lot of the body snatchers for the anatomists collected their bodies. And this is the beginning of an experiment. I think it's quite nice to see it in the rough stage because you'll be able to experience the finished article. We were trying to build a transposition between different time zones to show what happened on one particular site. So we had to develop a completely new technology in the sense of an interactive timeline. So we work with models superimposing themselves over each other. So if you look at this image, we're charting what is the heart of the university here. But we're looking at all the different buildings that existed on that site, so that you can migrate between these different digital models seamlessly. And we used all the artifacts in the city museums to make the correct correlations archaeologically with the site. And we were doing it at the time the archaeologists were actually digging out the centre of the courtyard, you've just seen, where they were discovering all these skeletons lying just under the surface of what was a car park. So there was a lot of history being unveiled at that time. This is a different era in time. You can see the yellow box at the bottom is the timeline moving along. And you can see the complete courtyard as it emerged. But this is not a pictorial project, this is a digital model. So with a gyroscope, with an iPad, you can interrogate the model in a very different way than it looks as a single still image. And one of the things I'm quite passionate about is the interpretation of different layers of history, I think. So this is a forum where at the National Museums of Scotland we opened the Festival of Architecture. It was one of the front events of it. But we were looking right back to the Neolithic and talking about each time new technology came in, what sort of advances in architectural innovation took place. And this is a project we're currently working on, which is looking at the Neolithic heart of Orkney. This is the islands in the north, extreme north of Scotland, which date back, this is a tiny village dating back to 3000 BC. So we're very interested in how that land was settled and colonised and how to describe archaeological fragments that are so fragile you can't actually get into them anymore. Okay, so we're moving on to more concrete artistic architectural projects. This was a commission for Edinburgh Art Festival in 2011. It's a happy and a sad story. There were highs and lows of this project. It's a very, this is a vista from Carlton Hill looking along the main axis of Princes Street. So it's a fascinating array of architectural objects. And here's the site I was given. And this was a commission where they were waiting to hear if the government would fund it. So I was commissioned very late, something like February, with the idea we'd have to start building it in June. So that wasn't very long away. And you can see here this square is part of a Georgian master plan of something that's called the New Town. So it's not very new anymore, it's 200 years old. And this has been shut off, this park, so nobody had been able to get into it for about the last century. So everybody sort of ignored it and forgotten about it. And this is the main axis looking back towards it. So the site is right at the top where you see the column there. So this was our monument, and as part of opening this park, we put this pathway through, and there was a little cafe in the bottom. But nobody had really noticed the monument for a long time. It was sort of sat there in the middle of everything. And my commission was to sort of think about how I might reinvent this space temporarily, because this was a commission of a year, potentially, rather than for it to be permanently sited there. So I was looking at the history of the festivals in Edinburgh, which have been a major success for the city since the Second World War when they were introduced. So these are arts festival, jazz festival, theatre festival. And I was thinking about the 24-hour clock a lot, and ideally looking at the park which I showed you. And I realised, of course, that this column was effectively a sundial, and maybe the people who put it there in the beginning had already thought of that. And so we actually started charting a digital model of this, and this is the model for the day that we would open the project. So we were looking at the light conditions, instead of in February when I was commissioned, we were looking at them in July. So you've got these very long lines of sight and this really strong sense of the clock coming across from it. And it was also a bit of a dull area, if I dare say it. So I was thinking about what sort of intervention could be really exciting, something like a collision between the past and the future. So I wanted to take that sense of time and really make something radiate out from the centre. And I was proposing different flying saucers or glass boxes colliding with the main axis of the pillar. And I didn't think I would get much support for it, but I was quite pleasantly surprised. So here's a detail of it. You can see that I'm trying, what I discovered about the pillar, which I should have mentioned, is that it's got 24 facets. And they're concave, so I was trying to make convex forms to recognise that on the outside. And I took this before the City Council and before fire and police, and also the guardians of this historic monument. We didn't think that anybody would give us permission, but we thought we would try. And actually they said as long as we didn't touch the monument and we could structurally support it without it, we could do it. So that was fantastic, and we were on an amazing roll. We started with a budget of about 140,000, and by the time we costed this version, it was up to about 320,000. So we had to do some really rapid fundraising. And this is the structure detailing of it. It was built with this inner ring, so that would take all the loading, as it were, and it would come down onto concrete base at the bottom of the pillar. So this is my ideal scenario for how it should look. And you can see inside the glass chamber this almost dial-like effect of the light moving around. And we also explored what you could see from that height up the pillar. So you got completely different vistas on many of the city monuments and architecturally important buildings. Okay, but what really happened was that I was about 40,000 short of the total, and we were running around madly trying to find somebody who'd back the last RTK. But because it was a financial recession, a lot of people were extremely reluctant to do that. But nevertheless, we found about 140,000 of extra money for this project. But the festival who commissioned it were getting a bit nervous that we were going to completely exceed all known budgets. So they actually defaulted to a much smaller proposal, which is this one, which is not nearly so exciting. I was quite heartbroken. But nevertheless, I pressed on. And what's interesting, if you look at this visualization on the next slide, is how similar it turned out to the visualization. But it's not nearly so exciting, I think we'd all agree. So this is the Minister for Culture in the blue dress, about to open it. I was still a bit upset that we hadn't managed to build the proper one, because I think I placed on east-west axis still to try and get the connection to time going. I actually only built 9 segments of it, but I built it to the same specification, the same structural integrity, that we could join the other sections to it when we got the money for the other bit, and put it up the monument where it's supposed to be. So there's ongoing discussions with the university about when we could do that. At the same time, I'd also commissioned, here's a top view of it, which at least gives some sense of this is the real image, not a computer-generated image. So you get a sense of the fragility and in a way, the simplicity of the design, but was actually very specific in the sense that the glass carried the loading, so there was very little structural elements on the outside edge. You got this very translucent envelope to see the city from, admittedly from a few meters lower than I'd anticipated. And because I work with a lot of young art students and artists, I'd commissioned 24 artists, each to make a site-specific installation at various international locations which they'd selected. And we gathered all this material together. We had a website where it was all collated, so they had a representation of both that project and a larger field of their work. And we had one night at the end of the festival where we projected and publicly screened documentation and videos from each project on the last night of the festival. So this is a very out-focused photo, but it gives a bit of the sense of excitement that we were trying to get with this refracting glass chamber and how it was supposed to operate by generating a point of excitement in the city as part of the festival. And this is just a couple of slides from a project to the Royal Observatory, Edinburgh. These were scientific buildings which were almost at the state of dereliction when we first saw them. And we were looking at innovative ways that they could be made properly into an educational resource. So we were trying to mix new technologies and the old technologies of astronomy and make poetic analogies between the micro and macrocosm. And we figured if we could get children, who were the principal visitors, we imagined, to make a basic understanding of light, optical light, and of naked eye astronomy, that we would be doing quite well with this project. So it was about the reuse of a building, repurposing of it. So this sort of obvious splitting of prismatic light in the centre of this chamber. And then different interpretations of how the planet orbited, the phases of the moon. Quite basic information we were trying to convey, but not necessarily widely known. So we were trying to tie that into the Scottish curriculum, which has tried to use more innovative methods of teaching things in the last few years. I'm going to take you on to this next project. This is the lovely site we were given. It's actually the beginning of Moscow Business Centre, which was a bit like London's Canary Wharf. That was the idea behind it. Whether it will actually transpire like that is another matter. Sorry. I'd been working on a project in Rotterdam, and I came back to Scotland because we got into the final 3, but we hadn't got the commission, so I was moaning about that when I came back to Scotland. And I was speaking with an architect who's a friend of mine, and he said, let's try and make a collaboration which is completely joint. So a lot of artists come in to work on architectural projects, to work on one particular aspect, facade. There's numerous contemporary examples, but we decided we were going to design completely 50-50. And that was a political decision that he got a lot of flack for, and I got quite a lot of flack from the artists as well. So we were trying to look at ways, I should tell you a bit about the actual brief for this. The client wanted a proportion of commercial space, but they also wanted a new registry office for the city of Moscow, and they wanted a museum. And there was a quite large, complex program, almost a lecture in itself, on what they wanted. But we were looking at different ways of designing space that would be a sort of filigree or matrix that would produce a different type of architecture from a lot of the postmodernist examples we were seeing in that city. So we were drawing through the whole process, and we were modeling different formats. And you can see the crossover, I guess, between some of the computer experiments, digital experiments we've run in other forums, and some of the examples here. This is a top view of the tower that we developed. And this is the two side views. You get a sense of quite a dramatic form, but it's essentially each floor plate has been moved 3 degrees from each other. And that's a very simple architectural move in one way, but actually produces quite a lot of complexity in things like fenestration, structural engineering, and construction. And here you can see the actual structural elements. There's 8 in the center, and there's 4 structural columns winding around the building. And this was designed in 2005, 2006, and it was in a lot of the architectural press then. And since then, there's not just because of this, because obviously there were some precursors, there's been an enormous rise in curved and rotating buildings. So this is sort of what we were striving for. We had a large amount of public space in the top. We'd almost borrowed the commercial space in the middle to give a podium on the top. And we had a large amount of public interactive space on the bottom. And here you can see the top view, looking down. This is another taller tower, or this is on the front of the master plan. And the master plan had been written 15 years before, but they'd asked for something that would give a living edge to this development. And that was why we'd been brought in by the client. You can also see that we were beginning to structure the landscape here. We were actually asked to design that public plaza next to it. And apart from the rather regimented rows of trees in this one, which we departed from, we had a much more free-form arrangement of different tree structures and different species of trees in the final version. This is about opening up the city from these different vantage points back towards the main heart of Moscow. So after that brilliant idea, we presented in various forums, 2006, 2007, then the financial crisis happened. So we just had a big hole in the ground and nothing was happening for about 5 years. So I thought we'd never happen. And then we began to get this. And it was quite interesting because of the way social media works, is that a lot of people had adopted this tower as it was being built. So people were following it and photographing all the time. So even though nobody was paying me to go to Moscow by this point, I could follow the progress of the tower through the social media. And it was quite amazing in the sense that all sorts of infrastructure around about it was being built. So the whole site was in a state of flux. And this is the completed tower. So we had all sorts of technical issues to solve, but we always worked jointly to solve them. So we had a large team of structural engineers, facade engineers, all sorts of different engineers, as you can gather, working with us to create this project. And you can see the beginning of the landscaping coming in there. But at the moment they still have this road, which eventually will be bridged over to make a unified public square. So once you're at the bottom of it, it really does have an incredible curve on it. And it wasn't just for the dramatic excitement of the curve. We were genuinely trying to get something different to happen in this form of this building and what its meaning would be in the city. And this is it has its own social media thing. This is not arranged by marketing or branding. This is just different people interacting with the building. And there's an enormous number of photographers working with it all the time, taking different images and posting them. But just to get back to the practical reality, at one point the client was saying to us, so how do you clean the windows on this? And these are all mountaineers actually, but they use them for the whole of this site, but carefully cleaning the glass for this. So the classic shot that the architects always show you of the sun rising or the sun setting over a building. And then moving on to this project that we've been working on most recently in Amsterdam. We've been on this for about the last 2.5 years. It started with a presentation to 50 master planners of Amsterdam. And they had this greenfield site. You can see here, this, at the top it says City Amsterdam. So this is their first information to the public about how the project is planned and what they're expecting to happen. So it says 5,500 new houses, a whole new environment for people to live in, on the water, and later on it goes on to explain its various aspirations to be a new eco part of the city. So we'll do all grey water recycling, all the sort of new sustainability issues that we're trying to address will be foregrounded in this project. And so I was working as part of the design team with this master planner, senior master planner, Mirjana Milanovic. And there were obviously landscape architects, other architects, various city officials concerned with all sorts of different parts of the infrastructure for this site. And what really made it viable in the end is the fact that the city fathers were willing to put a pedestrian bridge across here. And that connects it back to Central Station, which just sits here. So actually it's a very central part of the city. And it's seen as the keystone development of the whole new city of Amsterdam. So if you think of an arc, this is the top piece of the arc, cutting through the whole shape of the city. And the idea with these high-rises was to pattern it so there would be a large proportion of public space, because other parts of earlier Amsterdam from the beginning of the 20th century have a different system where they're almost like a courtyard structure with a square block around it. So we felt there was a possibility to create a new rhythm, a new structure in this space, and also because it's bounded by nature reserves, that we would have more gardens and public parks and everything through the district. So it's not really a place, you can get cars into it, but it's not really envisaged that people will live with cars. And this is a particularly Dutch solution, I would say, but much more that people will use it by bike or by boat. And I think, knowing Amsterdam, having lived there quite a long time myself, I think that's a credible story, whereas it might not be in other European cities. So you've got, this is looking back towards the city now, and because the Dutch have had several, or Amsterdam particularly, have had several very successful developments of Eiberg and various other islands that are populated at the back of Central Station, this has given, I think, a confidence for this move as well. And here is one of the much closer up images. We developed all the imaging in augmented reality and virtual reality, and a whole series of animations that were shared on public media, on Dutch television, and quite a lot of it was on display in the main public library, the centre of the city, so that people would have a chance to come and see it. And there was quite extensive debate about whether this new type of tower-stroke public park situation was typically enough Amsterdam to belong to the people. So there were quite a variety of thoughts on that, and we had 3 big public debates on that in the city, trying to gather different opinions and different ways forward. And this is the final slide of the series. This is actually headlining the fact that there was a city debate about it, showing a whole variety of images about the expression of the city and how it will work, how the infrastructure will work. So there was an enormous amount of information in the public domain. And 3 weeks ago, after about almost a year of public discussion, the City Fathers voted this scheme through. So I think it went 44-1. So it was an overwhelming majority to proceed. I think the only important thing to bear in mind is these towers are not indicative of what will look like. They're more to do with the scaling and general massing of how this area will look. Obviously, this master plan will now be deployed into various packages of work for different architects by open competition. But it's a really exciting stage for the City of Amsterdam. They're now moving on to develop land in the north, so they're going through a period of enormous expansion and ambition. So to close, each of the projects touches on different aspects of placemaking and considerations of site. I hope that this rapid journey through these selected projects gives a sense of potential and excitement in the way we can make the future, using both old and new technologies, and bridging between art and architecture. I hope it gives a sense of potential as well for the ideas for Kaunas 2022.
Thank you, Karen, for an inspiring speech. If anybody has a question for Karen at the moment, please use the opportunity.
No, but one of the things we wanted to invite you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Karen iš tikrųjų atsivežė parodyti, ką jie yra sukūrę planšetuose ir taip pat VR akiniuose. Tai po visos diskusijos, galbūt ne dabar, bet kai pabaigsim antrą paskaitų dalį, bus galima prieiti ir susipažinti su tais darbais, to šio tipo aktualią Amsterdamo tos projektuotos aikštės realybę ir pajausti tą visą plotą. So again, if there is any question?
I'm sure there will be a chance to speak more informally after this as well. So.
I would
ask about these 3 debates.
Yeah.
What was the reason for the debate or the conflict? What are the main positions?
Okay.
That were conflict?
There was a debate about what the true spirit of Amsterdam was and how Amsterdam should embrace the future, whether it should duplicate what it already had and just copy that out, or whether it should try to embrace a different ambition for this time. Mm-hmm. And so there was quite a generational thing between the different age groups of architects.
Groups, yeah.
So the younger ones were arguing for change, and the older ones were saying, oh, but this is not really Amsterdam. Not always, I don't want to completely.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
But also we had some architects who were quite senior offering other master plans of their own design that they would quite like to see built instead. So there was quite a lot of polemic between the architectural community, and then there were people, for example, who were concerned about the footpath we showed, because that naturally impacts on the end of their street. So they were the people who were most concerned about how that was going to change the sheer volume of traffic and other amenities that they would enjoy. So it was really either directly affecting them or was part of the larger architectural debate. But there's quite a lot of public activity in the, they have an architecture centre in the middle of Amsterdam, which fosters a lot of public debate anyway. So people are quite vocal about bringing their opinions forward.
And probably the follow-up is, what was the result of these debates?
Yeah.
Have you made any amendments, if any, or many? How do you, as a practicing group, how do you react to these debates?
Well, one of the things we were trying to do is actually increase the sustainable and eco advantages of it, because we were selling it, if you like, saying this is going to be a new way of living. And people were going, okay, well, we can understand that. So now we have to fulfill that probably at a higher magnitude than was originally envisaged by the council. So that's quite an interesting thing. So we pushed forward, and now the population, or the people who want to live there, are pushing again, saying, okay, now you have a chance to really do the whole district. So things like solar energy, all sorts of water recycling, treatment, etc., that we can really try this out on this type of scale. So I think it will set more precedents as it unfolds.
How do you think how much the virtual reality or the technology helps you to communicate with the community, your ideas?
I think that the virtual reality in particular, we had a few students try it earlier, maybe they can say something, but I think it gives a really strong sense of being in the digital model. So you're not just looking at computer-generated pictures. All right, it is computer-generated, but because you can move from different vantage points within the digital model, it's a very powerful communication tool. And we also made a series of animations that were shown both on the website and in Dutch TV that showed the transit of somebody on a bike actually through the whole space. But I think the virtual reality in particular is very compelling, so I would urge everybody who wants to try it on to put it on their head. It feels a bit strange to put it on, but once you're in there, it's much better.
Sorry.
Well, temporarily better.
With this glass pavilion which you've designed, which has been cut by half, and, did you have any ideas like to make it elevating all the way up the column in order to get a 360 panoramic view of the whole city?
Of which?
Literally just around the column, like so it would go and elevate up like to the top. So you have an exhibition space in the center, and you have the view of the whole city.
Yeah, but the engineering required for the one I was trying to do, which is 2 stories up.
But you're over budget now.
That engineering was complicated enough to get through the city fathers. I think also I didn't want it to become. I wanted to respect the monument, but I also wanted to show something very fresh to it. But it was a temporary addition. It wasn't implied that we would always sit around the monument. It was supposed to be there for a year.
Okay.
And I think that the edge.
Is it still here? Sorry for interrupting.
No, I still have the 9 bits waiting for the other bits, the other 16 bits. So we can put them all together. So probably before I die, we'll get help.
Hopefully not.
Well, it'll take a long time, that's what I mean. It was really, we were so close to building the large version, but sometimes you just don't get your ideas.
Because it's almost like a monument could be, like a London Eye is being built by the Thames, and this is the central focal point of the whole city, which you said has been abandoned and forgot for a long time.
Well, the architects who designed the London Eye then went on, after I designed that, but they went on to make something called the Brighton, I think it's Brighton 360 something or other,
yes,
where you go up a column like that, where you're raised up into the space. But I think mine was supposed to be more of a refraction chamber, but also to give that elevated view, because you were looking down that main axis right the way through the heart of the 18th century quarter of the city, to shift that idea, because everything is quite old and sleepy there. I'm sure some inhabitants would disagree, but I was thinking about how to rev it up a bit.